If you're trying to do too many things with it at once, it's actually quite bad. But if you're willing to break down, isolate your problem into this one feature, it's actually quite good.
GPT 3.5 feels like someone did a Google search for something, then they gathered the headlines from the first page, they stuck in a document for you. GPT-4 feels like you paid a concierge service to go do your research for you.
To be able to solve problems faster, making you feel productive again without having to ask dummy questions. And
the willpower as a service, just get over that initial roadblock to get you going, and then you can choose to ignore it, you can choose to use it, but then it's totally up to you. Hello everyone, welcome to season 3 episode 2. We are here with AI and software engineering. So this show will delve into the fascinating world of artificial intelligence and its profound impact on the field of software engineering, personal and professional projects. This episode is a must-watch for anyone interested in AI, side projects, side hustles, or software development. This was generated by AI as well. So maybe let's start with Thiago. What does AI mean to you, and what have you been using it for personally or professionally?
So I think AI to me means a way to be more productive at this point, or to be able to consume more content more quickly, to be able to solve problems faster. The current state of AI, like in general, I don't have any, let's say, philosophical views on AI. Not yet, but I like it. So the things that I'm using it for since maybe March, February, when I actually got into it, I got into it late compared to other folks started like early last year. So I had been using mostly GPT-4, helped me to put together meeting agendas, summarize things, compile like 360 feedback, even help to answer some more legal documents. I have used that to assist me to speed up or writing some more legal things. And on the engineering side, what I love using for as a manager these days, I don't get much code on the code base. Whenever I try to run things locally, whenever I try to fix a bug that I find, I often get into big problems, like basic stuff. And what I have been using it for, and it is amazing, is to help me to solve like local setup problems or just get into really basic stuff. One example, the other day I was trying to do some performance improvement on the app startup of Nubank's app, and we have some rules that prevent you from recording video or taking screenshots from the app. So I didn't know where in the code was, so I asked ChatGPT, tell me about the common ways of blocking users to record screen, and right there it was like, permission on the Android manifesto. That took me 30 seconds. And then I got moved into the next one. Okay, I need to be able to funnel all the requests through a local proxy. Boom. And I need to put some permission on Android that I didn't remember. It was like boom, boom, boom. And I just got the error log, the stack trace, I would paste, and 9 out of 10, I had the next step clear in my mind. Because I used to do those things in the past, but not like in the past 5 years. So some tooling changed, some things, and that has been amazing to just make me feel productive again without having to ask dummy questions. And like sometimes when I see some engineers asking basic questions like about things that I have no idea on, but this seems to be ChatGPT kind of question. Oh, how do I put this like instrumentation on Kubernetes for this? And then I just paste, okay, this is what you return me. And sometimes they're like, oh, that's actually helpful. But a lot of times they're like, let me Google that for you, and they get them away. But I have been using that for basically those two things, like summarize documents, come up with better agendas. Like today, I'm running like performance checkpoints now in the middle of H2 for my team. So I compile a bunch of 360 feedback, and I had a bunch of messages on Slack, and I need to summarize like maybe the top 3 points for someone to focus, and I just paste it on ChatGPT and ask me to summarize top 3 strengths and top 3 areas to focus. And it was pretty good start. I had to fix and of course change things, but it just saved me a lot of time to come up with things on the spot, especially things that are shaped well enough that you can see on the structure. But I think that's pretty much what I've been using it for.
That's amazing. I agree, Thiago. At least ChatGPT, I know you said dumb questions and there's no such thing as dumb question, but at least ChatGPT won't judge you for trivial questions, and no matter what, you'll get a response out of it. Agreed. Thanks for sharing. Louis, do you want to go next?
For me, basically, some of you guys might know, I went on my own, left a big company, and I've been just basically made my side projects my main thing, if you will. I've been working on small bets itself, but placing various small bets. This thing has been like a godsend for that kind of stuff. I mean, I can't tell you how much more productive I am. And I'm actually like probably exclusively using it for code. Like I'm really not using it to help me with writing or content or any of that kind of stuff. And it's mostly just focused on code. And it's actually quite good. I mean, if you're willing to accept a certain amount of tech debt, which, if you have a brand new project and you haven't even made a dollar on it, you should be willing to accept a lot of tech debt until you could get to the dollars, and then you could think through that. And so I'm terrible at like front end, and it allowed me to build pretty much the entire sort of front end for smallbets.co, the site. And the site gets decent amount of traffic. I mean, Daniel Vasala has it on his profile, so it ends up getting like a couple 100,000 hits or whatever. It's not beautiful or anything, but it allowed someone like me who's never worked with CSS as a back-end developer to put this thing together pretty quickly, just spit out Tailwind. And then I actually learned Tailwind because I'm seeing what classes it's using. I'm figuring out, okay, this is actually how this works. And then I'll ask a stupid question like, how do I change this color? And I see that it just tweaked one little thing. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay, so now I understand how that works. And it's actually not a bad way to learn something. What's really fascinating is as you're building things with this thing, I think if you're trying to do too many things with it at once, it's actually quite bad. But if you're willing to break down, isolate your problem into this one feature, into this one problem, and then work from there with it, it's actually quite good. And one other thing that is really good that I've noticed is if we come back to that tomorrow, I don't know if it's me or if it's the AI or whatever, but with a clean slate, and I give it this code that we worked on yesterday, and I say, hey, what's wrong with this code? Let's pay down some of that tech debt now. And it's actually quite good at that. Like I'm able to give it an entire Azure function. It reads through it. It says, you're doing this right. You got logging here. You're not, this thing could have an exception. You're missing that. It's like having, I don't want to say a pair programmer, but it's like having somebody sitting on your shoulder, just saying, you missed this one little thing. And it's actually really good to do that post, like after you built the thing and it's working, to run it through it again. But you don't want to run it in the same context. You want to run it in a new window, whatever. It's just been like a godsend for me. I mean, both from like picking up front end and being able to run with that. I mean, I probably would have had to spend weeks or months trying to learn this stuff. And it's just, I could just have something and then tweak it from there. But you do need to know what you're doing. Like it'll make very obvious mistakes sometimes. And when you know what you're doing, it's actually quite good. So that's where I'm at. I mean, I'd say it's increased my productivity by many X. And it's unbelievable from my side to, of course, you got to look past the fact that you are introducing some tech debt. And I know at first that might throw a lot of developers off, or they might not want to use it because of that. But I do think it's like, it hasn't even been a year. Like the thing, I don't know how long it's been since GPT-4 came out. And the fact that it's this far along gives me a lot of hope that this thing is probably going to get significantly better over time. But that's my 2 cents with it. I'm in love with it, basically. And I'm mostly using it for code. Vic, you want to jump in?
So I think I use Copilot. I also use GPT 3.5, and I also pay for GPT 4. And I use them all in slightly different ways, and I'll tell you how. I first started using Copilot. Copilot helped me when I was learning Go from scratch.
Vic, can you just spend 2 minutes describing Copilot and what it is and what it does?
Yeah. So GitHub Copilot is this product by GitHub. And they basically use an OpenAI model actually called, I want to say like Codex or something like that. But it's trained on a whole lot of public code basically to come up with. I look at Copilot as a very intelligent autocomplete. If you've ever used Gmail and you're typing a letter to someone and you see the next word show up and you can hit tab and you can accept it, think that, but for code. That really is the best way to describe Copilot. I don't feel like Copilot is like super intelligent, but I feel that it's a very good autocomplete. So it helped me really learn Go about a year or so ago when I had to write Go for this job, and I hadn't written too much Go before, and it had been like, I want to say like over 5 years, and the language changes a lot. And you show up and you're like, whoa, I don't remember that. And Copilot was really helpful for me. I would just write a comment. I would just start writing like func, whatever, add 2 numbers or whatever. And then it would start to like autocomplete for me, like X int, comma, Y int. And I'm like, okay. So in this language, the types come after. And it would automatically add like my return for me. If you would type a comment saying X numbers cannot be lower than 0, but you help it along, and it would then like autocomplete the next line for me, where it would do the check automatically to ensure, and it would throw the right errors and all that. It's really cool. And how it was for me, the same way that like autocomplete saves you a ton of time and you're trying to think of that next word, it was super cool to just save so much time on these rote tasks. Like there's no like business value in some of the things that we do. Copilot helps me with, this is a cool one. I've spent hours before writing stupid little bash scripts that just, I need to write a make file that just like uploads this thing to this thing. And I can have Copilot just like basically do a day's worth of work for me in 30 some minutes. It's really cool. Sometimes I'll be like, here's a data structure that I just got in this function. And I'll say, and I'll type a comment. I need this event structure in the form square bracket, event, object, ID, transform the data into put the data here. And then I will just wait 2 seconds and it will generate like 10 lines of code for me. Those 10 lines would have probably taken me like 4 hours to write, then write a bunch of tests to figure out if it's actually working. And then on the other side of that, I hate writing tests. A lot of people, they say like tests are a waste of time, and they sort of are sometimes, but you can't like as a serious engineer ship production code without writing tests, knowing whether this code that you wrote, man, they're super time consuming. And I find that Copilot helps me write tests, and it helped me like learn some new ways of writing tests in Go. Then and you don't just accept everything, right? You shouldn't ever accept anything at face value. And Louis spoke a little bit about that. It makes some silly mistakes sometimes. Okay? It'll just add an extra comma that is like not valid in JSON, and it will just do it, and you'll have something fail, and you go, oh, okay, silly little Copilot, what did you do? But it'll help you write tests, and I found that to be super useful. Of course, there's a lot to be said here. It's writing the code, and it's writing the test for the code. What part of this am I involved in? Is this even right? Obviously, you don't take everything at face value. It wrote me 4 hours of code in 10 minutes, but you know what I'm good at is reading code and knowing if it makes sense or not. So you definitely do that. So that's Copilot for you. Love it. But I still think that it's just a kind of smart autocomplete. And then there's GPT. Everyone has access probably to GPT 3.5. That's the public version. Here's, I think, the difference between GPT 3.5 and 4 for me. GPT 3.5 feels like someone did a Google search for something, and then they gathered the headlines from the first page, they stuck in a document for you, and they're like, here, I did your research project for you. GPT 4 feels like you paid a concierge service or a virtual assistant to go do your research for you. It goes super into details. And I use it for like way more than code. Earlier today, my buddy messaged me and he's, hey, I'm thinking of going to Asia for 14 days. Where would you go? Okay, look, I could have typed a bunch of recommendations of places that I've been to, but I was like, you know what? It seems like a solid use case. I typed the same exact question in GPT 3.5 and 4. GPT 3.5 was like, go to Japan, spend 2 days here. Go to Thailand, spend 2 days here. And they're like, it writes like a line, right? GPT 4 was like, here are some solid places for you to go to. As you indicated that you have kids, here are some places that your kids will really enjoy, like this zoo, or the hours. And then I said, tell me about the top restaurants in these cities that you put in this itinerary in tabulated form along with their Michelin star rating. And it was like, all right. And it just gave me this table of all of that. And I was like, okay, you know what? That's great. That's like research. And I use GPT, both versions, because there's like a usage limit for 4. So you can only send like 50 messages, 3.5 hours or something like that. But I use both for like rubber ducking. And it's not just land an itinerary for me. I will be like, here's this one line of it's like, I'm not pasting like secret company code in there, but it's like this one line that transforms this one variable into this other like weird pointer and extracts the value. And I'm like, what the hell is that? You can copy paste that into Google and be like, what does this do? Or you can copy paste into GPT and it'll be like, it'll explain like line by line, sorry, not line by line, like I'm pasting a line of code. It'll be like, here's like the exact transformation, why this works. And the other day it told me like, and here's a gotcha for you. This is a bug that can result in this like, weird race condition. And I was like, what? That's good to know. And it's like the conversational aspect of it is fantastic. And there's a lot of stuff that we have to do. Like I have to work with Kubernetes config sometimes, and I don't care to learn Kubernetes. It is like zero use to me. I don't care. I don't care to read an hour of documentation to figure out like, how do I paste this one piece of configuration, right? So I said, hey, I have this operating system environment variable and I want to transform it like this and pass it into a container like this. Hook me up. And it basically gave me like, it wasn't correct the first time. It gave me an answer that I tried to put in, and my config validator was basically like, no, that's not right. And then I said, that's not right. And it goes, my bad. I see the error in my logic, and it tried to fix it. And I was like, you know what? This is totally like talking to another developer. It's not like a super intelligent being or whatever. It will totally make mistakes, and you have to know, and you have to not get mad at it. You have to like correct it. And sometimes the thing to know is that if you're asking for the kinds of information where you are convinced that, oh, whatever it told me is correct and you believe everything at face value, some of the things may not be great for you. And the last thing I will tell you is so I maintain a brag doc basically of the most important and impactful things I've been doing. And it's just in bulleted form. And when the review time comes, They basically are like, tell us everything that you did or whatever. You need to do like your self-review, right? And I was like, I got to transform all these bullets to make sense. I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I pasted my job description. I was like, this is my job description. This is my brag doc. Write me several paragraphs where you can link the things I did, link them back to the job description and the impact I made. And it was phenomenal. And that was with GPT-3. I'm like very excited to see how this turns out with 4. It's not like any of this was like stuff I didn't do. It's just that really rote, really boring job of needing to translate this long bulleted line into a really nice paragraph. And I edited it, of course. I didn't just like copy paste. I didn't want to like to end up with any things in there that were like, as an AI language model, I don't know how to help you. Of course, you edit the work it does as well to make sure it sounds closer to what you would write. But this was super helpful for me.
I think we went full circle. So Vic, you use it to come up with your reviews. Tiago uses it to collate the reviews. And
I should just give him bullet points.
Yeah.
My man is probably like using it to transform my paragraphs back into bullet points.
Exactly. It's very meta. There's 3 levels of AI in there. One to expand on documents, one to summarize it, and one to wordsmith it. Tiago, do you want to jump in, and then I can go after with my...
Yeah, no, I just want to make a comment on something that Vic said. GPT-4 is fantastic to organize travel itineraries. When I went to Iceland, my sister-in-law, she spent like 2 weeks doing this whole itinerary of Iceland. And in Airbnb here, we have a whole set of restrictions because she's vegan. My wife doesn't eat chicken. Like, there are a lot of those things. It was really hard. So I put like all those restrictions. Okay, we are 2 couples traveling. Like, we have 10 days. We're doing, and he came up with something beautiful. But here is one thing that he did. It invented a lot of restaurants in Iceland that didn't exist. So much that existed. The sound was really far away from the areas. So I would not trust it too much. I think it allows me for something really specific, like New York City or some really contained area. It was not great for that, but is impressive. I mean, and you can even say you pick someone that's famous for knowing that area and say, imagine you are this person that's the Iceland expert on what you would recommend for 10 days, It's amazing. You will come
man.
with a lot of ideas.
I should tell it to like, what would Anthony Bourdain go to if he were on my vacation in like Asia or whatever? One other thing, it just helps me get over like the mental block sometime of getting started.
That's the huge thing. That's the biggest one for me.
Yeah, like sometimes I won't even be like, keep going. I'll just be like, that was great. I'm just gonna like, or I will disagree with it. It's like that thing. If you want answers from the internet, you don't ask a question, you post the wrong opinion. I find that works for me with GPT. Like, I'll be like, how do I do X? And it like starts telling me, and I'm like, that's not how I would do it. And then I like basically solve my own problem. And I was like, you know what? That was great. Great job. I will accept that.
Tiago says GPT-4 is willpower as a service. I agree wholeheartedly. I can jump in with some of mine. I'll start with some of the non-techie versions. I have a 9-year-old boy who is a voracious reader. He'll read anything from like manuals to like any appliances we get installed. He'll open the manual and read it. He'll read like nutritional label on food items. He'll read anything. Needless to say, we go to the library a lot, and he finishes series like 300-page. So I'm always out of ideas for what book series to recommend for him to read next that are obviously age appropriate, but also fun for him to read. So I literally put in the last 3 series that he liked to read. I told him what his favorite author is. It's Rick Riordan. He likes Greek mythology, doesn't like sports. He likes fantasy. He was also very specific. I like some facts mixed with fantasy, and not all mythology, but has to be Greek mythology. So I gave it all the criteria, and it came up obviously with
Arsha. I recommend you Arsha. I want to know if I'm better than ChatGPT or not.
It recommended Chronicles of Narnia. It recommended Rick Percy, Rick Riordan, and a few other authors. We went to the library, we placed a hold on a whole bunch, and then at least it gives him an option to try different variations, and then, which is great because I didn't grow up reading a lot of these books or a lot of these genres. This helps me make sure they're age appropriate. They're obviously popular enough that GPT knows about them. So that's a great use case and a lifesaver. Another thing I've used it for is scavenger hunts. Like, my kids like their birthday presents hidden in some part of the house or garage or somewhere. So I describe it to ChatGPT saying, I need 10 clues. I have 2 bedrooms, 1 garage, 1 basement. where do I hide? What do I call my clues? And it comes up with great rhymes. It comes up with elaborate scavenger hunt. It gives you what clues to write. It's amazing. Like, it just shaved 3 hours of my life of me having to sweat and make sure it's fun, make sure it's easy enough. Completely takes that hassle away from your life. So highly recommend it. We used it for favors for like kids' birthday party. Again, I'm a lot of things, but I'm not creative. You can tell GPT, come up with a haiku for a 7-year-old that loves soccer and basketball but hates technology. And then it'll come up with some relevant memes with some relevant haikus. You put on the favor and said, give it to all the kids. Kids are thrilled. Nobody thinks the parents helped out. The kid did it, but nope, it was ChatGPT all along. So definitely recommend it. On the technical side, it's funny. My wife was having some issues trying to go through big Excel documents and transforming them into Microsoft project. And she had to do these on a daily basis. And when I looked at it, I thought, okay, maybe this is a great task for automation. Obviously, my wife doesn't have a technical background. She didn't want to do it. And I haven't touched VBA, like Visual Basic Application scripts, in 15 years. So I had no idea how to set up libraries to import from Microsoft Project into Excel, how to set this up. So I asked ChatGPT and again said, I have no idea. Where do I start? Walk me step by step. And it did. Some parts were easy to follow along. Some parts it was referencing DLL files that didn't exist. So there was some version mismatch. There were challenges along the way, but Vixet, definite starting point, definitely helps you at least get the ball rolling. If it wasn't for that, I would have been overwhelmed, like, crap, I don't know how to do this. I need to go get a book. I need to find online resources. I need to watch a YouTube video, something to remind me how VB script work and how to run them, right? This was great. Gave me some code snippets. I tried them. Wasn't exactly what I wanted. I could tweak it enough to get it going. Obviously, I anonymized the data, asked for generic approaches. So it totally worked. There's something I wouldn't have been able to do without spending a lot more effort on my end to remind myself how the scripting worked, how to set up the integration, what sort of library imports I need to do, which was pretty mundane, but took away time and energy from my life. So love it, love it. Definitely would recommend it for any of your projects, whether it's personal, professional. Definitely try it, at least as a starting point. Like, I love the willpower as a service. Just get over that mental hurdle, that initial roadblock to get you going. And then you can choose to ignore it. You can choose to use it, but then it's totally up to you. Go ahead, Louis. Do you want to jump in?
I think because of that, it makes programming fun again, right? Because you get these very frustrating points in development that you're doing something that you really dislike doing. It could be repetitive even. It could be, you mentioned unit tests, right? You could be mentioning some of these other things. And it makes it fun because it just takes that mental burden from that. And the other thing is that going from an idea, like basically, as an example, I wanted to build this sign-up system for small bets. Now, of course, in my head, I write something down with a pen and paper, and I already know what the architecture should look like, how I'm going to build this thing, how it's going to work. And now I have to write a shitload of code. This is the hard part now. That's the fun part, like just the boxes, right? And then now we got to write the code. And then you start writing the code, and it can be quite frustrating. But then you go to this thing and you have 80% of the code. I mean, you have the bulk of this project. And it's just such an amazing feeling to go from idea, from these boxes to this thing very, very quickly. It genuinely makes programming fun because that's the hard part with programming. You get stuck on some really frustrating issue and then it stops being fun because those little moments, the micro trauma from those little moments really ruins it for you. And I feel like those, I don't want to say they're completely gone, but they're nearly gone. And that's an amazing feeling.
So I just want to tell another interesting use of GPT-4, that was called the code interpreter. Now it's called advanced data analysis. I don't know if you folks have been playing with that. You can send like CSV files or emojis and you can ask things. And the other day we had a lot of emojis on Slack, right? All those emojis on Slack. And there is a famous one that is someone shaking. You take a picture and put like Vic shaking, whatever it is. And I want to make a GIF like that for someone else. And it was like, I Googled it and it was not easy. So I just downloaded the GIF that I had and I sent to ChatGPT and like, write me a code that will replicate like the similar effect that is on this GIF file, the shaking, for a new image. And he read the GIF all the frames of the GIF image, extracted, built some code that did some shaking. It was not perfect, but it came out with Python code that I just sent over the image and build like a GIF that had really similar effect. That would take me forever, right? And that's just something that I would never thought about using ChatGPT.
I was just going to say that this is something that Louis was talking about, right? Like the things that are not fun seldom have to do with the problem you're trying to solve. They're like the weird pieces of glue, like things like data transformation. They're like the generic problems that everyone has, and every one of us spends so many hours and hours. And there's a solution for it on Stack Overflow, of course, because these are all like generic solutions that we would look for. And then you basically go to Stack Overflow and find the top most voted answer for how do I turn a pointer into this thing. These are the most frustrating parts of you trying to create something and put something out. And I do think that those frustrating things are slowly but surely going away. And it's great. I think it was, I forget which one of you called it willpower as a service. But a tiny story here is that, so I gave a talk a couple of days ago about building local first applications with SQLite. And I had many months to come up with this talk. I did not do anything. And then about a week ago, I said, okay, this is bad. I basically have a title slide, which I'm no longer happy with. And so I said, generate me a talk outline with this title and this abstract. And GPT-4 generated me this long talk. It was like, in 45 minutes, here's how I would give a talk. And you know what? I was like, that's trash. That is absolutely not what I would do. And then I wrote my entire talk in probably a few hours. I sat on this thing for like 4 months. And then I disagreed with a bot and I wrote the entire talk just out of spite. You know what? It absolutely is a fantastic way. It goes back to that whole thing about you're far more likely to like animatedly disagree with someone else's opinion than you are to put something brand. I mean, it's like, it's a Kickstarter for ideas, and even bad ideas, at least for me, kickstart me into like going deep into a topic that previously it was just a blank slate about.
That's hilarious. I love it. It takes disagreeing with a bot to get your creative juices flowing. As we were getting ready for this episode, a bunch of you shared that you pay for GPT-4 and happily do so. Maybe we can quickly get into, I know Vic touched on the details that you get back, but I also wanted to talk about legality and copyrights there. Based on my understanding, if you use 3.5, anything that you paste in there is now happily used by OpenAI to train new data. If it's proprietary, even if there is patents on it, if you've put it in there, the model doesn't know any better, and now it's part of the training model, and now you've just allowed other people to use copyrighted data, whether it was malicious intent, whether it was by mistake, what have you, right? So maybe junior engineers don't know as well. They don't understand. They're fresh out of school. They copy paste the whole method or the whole file or as much as they can to say, explain this to me, or this is what I'm trying to do. How would I implement this, or where would I start? Not understanding the full impact of what they just did till it's too late, where it shows up with some keys somewhere else much later. So how have either you guys professionally been wary of that, or have your workplaces recommended you deal with some of those situations, and what checks and balances do you have in place?
I can go first. So we have a GitHub Copilot for business license at work. You can ask for a license and one will be granted to you. And so when you have a business license, I think the data subprocessor agreement that you have with GitHub just becomes completely different. They don't retain any code snippet data. They don't train on any of your data. And this is something that is vetted from legal, all that. We've embraced the position that this is a tool that's going to help you be better at your jobs, and we're just not going to prevent you from using it. We're going to put all the right privacy and legal structure in place to allow you to use it. So that's great. I absolutely do not paste anything of any business value in like GPT. No one should. Don't do that. You have no idea whether your AWS access key that you're accidentally pasting is going to end up in someone else's answer that's returned back by GPT. It's a terrible place to be. You've effectively given away business secrets, and that you've violated your company's non-disclosure agreement by pasting your secret code in there. There's a difference between doing that and saying, explain to me this line of code that has zero identifying information, and you may just, and I try to make my request as generic as possible. Instead of saying oftentimes, explain this line of like like copyrighted code, I'll even say, write me a script that will post a line of a JSON document to a public API using a bash script. And it'll be like, sure, here's a generic script, and it'll print out a whole script. And I'm like, great, copy paste those into the relevant parts of that into my code, as opposed to pasting my stuff into GPT and saying, fix this up and turn this into a thing for me. And you got to be sure that you don't do the kind of things that are going to get you fired.
I have a different opinion on this, but maybe it reflects where I'm at right now professionally. I really don't. I think there's very little risk in terms of, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I just think there's very little. If my shitty CSS is going to end up in someone else's code, great. Have fun. I mean, take it. I mean, if you think about some of the best code in the world, in my opinion, some of the best code in the world is really in these open source projects that everyone already has had access to for a long time. And there's really almost no one function that's so novel and so secret that if someone discovers that one 5-line function, they just unlock the next Google. And that's the secret recipe. It doesn't exist anymore. Everything's out there. And so I just think the context is not big enough for this thing to steal your secrets. I mean, of course, unless you're giving it like literally your API secret, that's really dumb. Don't do that. But if we're talking about giving it 5 lines over a file, like I said, I really find it. There was this case, right, between Oracle and someone else, and Oracle won in the first part. And I think later it went to other, and Oracle lost. Is, can you copyright an API? And it was just a silly case, right? Oracle was nitpicking that some engineer at Google re-implemented some function or whatever. It's just, and Google said, we did it in a clean room. We didn't even look at your 5 lines. And I don't know, it was a whole thing. But the point is, it's such a silly thing that we're arguing over, especially when there is so much of that code in the open domain. It's really not a secret anymore. And from my view, I really think the secret is the whole thing. I mean, the whole feature, how you're doing how this system communicates with this other system and what's happening there, and that recipe, that is the secret. I don't think the secret is the 5 lines of code. I mean, it's just one part of it. So my opinion is basically that I'm pretty loose with this stuff. Like I am very generous with GPT and my code because, number one, it gave me that in the first place. So here, you can have it back. Let's make it better. But I'm joking. I'm mostly joking. But, it does have this tendency, we're going back to the thing, it does have this tendency to overcomplicate things, right? So once in a while, you end up taking what it's giving you. Sometimes I get mad at it. I'm like, why are you making this so complicated? I mean, I told you what I want. You exploded this function out. This is crazy. And then I rewrite it and I give it back to it. I'm like, here you go. This is how you should do it next time. And they're like, I understand now. and next time, make it better. And maybe I'm giving away the secrets and that's it. But honestly, it's good. Like, I want to do less work. And so for me, I feel like there's really no secret that's going to be encapsulated in 5 lines of code. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. There might have been in the past that you could have protected that for a little while. But now, I mean, the jig is up. The game's over. Everyone knows everything. And so I just feel there's really not much you're going to lose there. And there is this huge advantage, by the way, of giving it large chunks of code. Like, I'm not talking about your entire program, but I'm talking about a file or a couple of functions and saying, how would you do this differently? Because here's the thing. I find myself a lot of the times, I know the answer, or I've crafted an answer I'm making it sound like a feature or a thing. I built the thing. But I'm curious, is there another way to do this? And I will learn a brand new way to do something, which is very interesting that I've never even thought of. And to me, that's super useful. And you can't really do that if you're feeding it like 1 line at a time. You need to just give it the context and say, here you go. Tell me what the best way to really shape this up is. And it's fascinating when it gives you something totally different. And I think you become a better developer that way. I mean, look, I've been writing code for a long time. I stopped for a little while because I was obviously managing people. But I really feel like in the last year of using this thing, I mean, I've leveled up like crazy. Like I know, I mean, I used to work with very senior engineers. And so I just see the way this stuff is shaping up and how quickly you could take something and just really make it rock solid through a couple of iterations through this thing. It's just very fascinating, but it does require you to give them some of the secret sauce. But I don't think it's secret anyway, so that's just my opinion. But you guys, I don't know if who wants to jump in.
I can jump in. Yeah, I think there's a slight difference between running your own shop and working for a Fortune 500 company or a company that's come up through the ranks that have large code bases or that deal with PHI, or if you're working with the DoD or defense or anything of that sort. So again, Samsung recently banned ChatGPT and all AI-powered chatbots after a big chunk of their source code ended up being referenced or being generated for other individuals that were asking for similar code. Basically, they did see an engineer or five haste proprietary. Again, it may not be the 5 lines of code that makes someone rich overnight, to Louis' point, but there is enough IP in certain code bases that people guard with lives. Obviously, there's revenue, there's like stock price, there's a lot of guards in place that are there for a reason. So I think in industry, we are seeing like a big bifurcation where some companies are like, okay, we need to lock this down. You can't use any AI-powered chatbot. They block the website. And then similar to what Vic said, there are companies that are embracing the GitHub Copilot, getting the business license and saying all the programmers, all the engineers can use it as much as they want. And obviously, even at my workplace, our legal team spent a lot of time with Microsoft to make sure that none of the snippets are used to retrain models. Nothing is ever shared outside the company. Their model stays within. So they spend a lot of time, effort, money to make sure that it's used appropriately. And I think as long as companies are embracing that this is only making better developers, however they do that, whether it's getting mad at the chatbot and saying, this is not how you should do it, this is how you should do it, still forcing them to think for themselves, or asking for boilerplate code, or asking them to start as a good starting point, it does help in its own way. So I think it's good to embrace this, that there's no running away from this, but obviously doing it with some caution. I think that'll definitely goes a long way. Diego, do you want to share?
Somewhere in between Louis and Vic. I mean, I agree with Louis that as much context as you can give is usually better. And when you try to give one-liners or just like generic answers, is not going to come with something as powerful. I definitely see like the other side, that kind of you're working on a public traded company is hard because you might run into trouble, even though that information might not be that valuable. Like, for example, the example that Kier was giving about, what was that, Samsung, you said?
Yeah, there was Samsung that had a big, like a news leak. They had to do a press conference. Yeah.
And it was that code that was generating like something useful to other companies? Was that like something?
It was. They claimed it was part of a patent or proprietary,
I see.
which is why it should have stayed within the company walls, but it did.
Yeah. I mean, I try to anonymize a few things when I'm using for professional users. And I mean, I'm not coding most of the time. So I usually don't use it for coding, just to troubleshoot stuff or to summarize some documents. And like when it is like, for example, 360 feedback is like generic information. I don't put people's full names. And I really don't feel it's something that's unique. Right, and I'm not doing the 360 feedback for the CEO. I'm there for the engineer, so I don't think there is much value there. But I definitely see the problem if you're sending API keys, or if you're sending code with the package name of your company and all that. That you might actually get. They have these firewalls that run locally that try to inspect whatever you're copying and pasting, right? You might run into problems with that, even though I don't think there would be a problem with ChatGPT reusing that information. But I mean, I still need to do more research on that to see what can actually be done with the information you send there, and what are the risks for your company, especially if you're sending some super small, complex information.
Yeah, I think one of the things I saw recently showed up was if you didn't have a Windows professional license or Windows 11 license, you could ask ChatGPT and it would give you a perfectly valid license key because somebody had pasted it in and it used it as part of his training model. And here you go. You can go activate the latest version of Windows for free because GPT gave it.
You still have to pay for Windows?
By
Thing of the past.
Let's go into pricing, since perfect segue. What sort of pricing can folks expect either for using the GPT-4 APIs? And maybe if you guys can share what level you use the APIs for and how much you end up paying. Again, I know mileage will vary. People will have different users, different thresholds, different models that they use. But I think it'll be good to give our audience just a ballpark as a starting point on how much they can expect to spend if they do go down this route.
We're using ChatGPT in some interesting ways. Obviously, I'm using the personal account, which I can't believe it's only $20, right? Think about how much power this thing has given me, and I'm paying $20 for it. And I mean, like literally, I'm building software. I don't want to exaggerate, but many orders of magnitude faster than I would have if I didn't have this thing. And we're making money with this software. I mean, it's not, the stuff is not being used by anybody or any of that. In fact, I almost feel bad for some of these venture-backed startups right now because it's so easy to replicate their products. I mean, you don't need to see the code or anything. Some of these seed stage or Series A companies, that SaaS companies, I mean, you could spin up what they do. They have no moat anymore because it's so easy to just pump out so much code and have a competing problem. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's stick to pricing. I can't believe it's that cheap is my point. And then going from that to actually paying for this thing to use its APIs and all of that, we are using it that way too, because we have in our small bets community, we have this bot that the community talks to. And we have about, 3,500 members inside the Discord. And at least daily, everyone's using it now daily for these inspirational quotes. And it's actually quite funny because we trained it to take on different personalities. And one of the personalities is quite insulting, but it's like motivating and insulting at the same time. But it actually gives GPT quite a bit of life when it can get out of its guardrails a little bit. And it's a very interesting mode, and people really enjoy using that. But that costs some money, but it's not a lot of money. I mean, with 3,500 members in the Discord community, the highest we've had to pay is $30 in 1 month. And I still cannot believe. I mean, I don't know if we're all being subsidized because this startup is just trying to eat the internet and then sell it back at a premium to us later. But right now, it is cheap, man. It is too cheap. The Chat GPT itself is very cheap for the amount of quality you get out of it. And then the APIs themselves, in my opinion, are very cheap for what we're using it for. Again, the scale is not insane. It's not like our bot is interfacing with millions of users, but it's certainly in the thousands. Not all. There's only a few hundred active members a week in the community, and they switch a lot. 300, 400, 500 active members in a week, but they switch a lot, and certainly again, it's getting daily usage. And the highest month we've had so far is about, I was just looking, $27.15, which is not. Again, I can't believe it's this cheap, but it's where we are. I feel like the price of a lot of things could drop soon because of this technology.
GitHub Copilot costs $10 a month, I believe. The personal version, I don't know what the business version costs. I'm not the one paying for that. The personal version is $10 a month. And then because I've contributed to open source, GitHub actually made it free for me. And so I wasn't paying for that. GPT-4 is $20 a month. I have looked at the API pricing, but I don't use the API. And so what Louis said is probably probably what I would look up. The $20 a month totally feels, I mean, it's in terms of the amount of time saved, it's amazing. Wait, do I have thumbs up bubbles? Oh, yeah. Oh, look at that. Yeah, in terms of the amount of money saved, in terms of the amount of time saved, man, it's $20 is nothing. If you think about, for example, the research into that trip to Asia that I did just today, that is several hours of work. Or if I'd paid for a VA to do that for me, that would have cost me something like magic.com or something like that, one of those different VA places. It would have cost me a lot more than that, and just in times of sheer time. And I'm about to use it for doing things like writing haikus on birthday party favors like Kayur talked about. That stuff is going to go crazy over that. I'm going to be bad at it. It's going to take me forever. That's more than $20 worth for me.
Maybe we can get into what all of your thoughts are on how good the tooling is currently and how good it's, let's say, going to be in a couple of years. And I know if you see like the trajectory from even the initial GPT models to where we are with GPT-4, it's crazy. It's an exponential curve in terms of the number of tokens that you can use, in terms of how good it has gotten. So I think one of the questions everyone has on their mind, is it making programmers irrelevant? Are all programmers going to be out of a job in 10 years? And do you just need to be better prompt engineers to figure out what to do? Or do you actually need to still go through your rigor of going through either formal education or a boot camp or spending enough hours with some sort of learning when to call bullshit and say, okay, GPT is just lying or making shit up, and this is not the correct answer? Or is it enough to get by, and in a couple of years it'll be so good that you won't need to be as good to catch things? Maybe we can do a quick roundtable and get your thoughts. Vic, do you want to start?
Yeah, I do think you have to be somewhat knowledgeable of being able to call bullshit, right? Like I asked for a recipe recently. I said, I have chicken, I have peppers, I have heavy cream, I have tomatoes. Make me a recipe, right? And I looked at this recipe and it was a pretty good recipe. And I was like, I would add way more garlic than that, right? And you have to be able to adapt to the answers you're getting. And whether that's programming or whether that's cooking, you are going to be the domain expert, and you can rely on it to help you with the glue and the tooling. We talked earlier about how it makes the boring parts of programming a lot easier, but you're still going to need to pay attention in meetings. You're still going to need to be able to translate user requests into product features, and you need to have the common sense to know the trade-offs between what you're building and what users need and all that. You're not going to be able to, maybe you can take every single word that you're listening to every single day, feed them all to GPT and say, give me insights. But at that point, you're putting yourself out of a job. We as humans really need to know at what point we can use the machines to make our jobs easier, and at what points we've decided that we are useless and we want to sit back and retire. And we're not at that point yet where we're getting like universal basic income so that we can sit back and relax and not need a job. As far as like school and stuff, the degrees that different employers need in order to be able to hire you, more and more we're seeing fewer and fewer employers actually need like higher education requirements. And that came before GPT, right? That is just, people have become self-learners faster in this field anyway, more than other fields. And we don't need the kind of certifications that nurses and doctors and even electricians need, because it's a lot harder for us to kill people with code. At least it's the theory. You should still continue to use things like GPT to help you become a faster learner so you can get those jobs. At least right now anyway, you're not being replaced by an LLM model. Use this to differentiate yourself from the other people that are in the job market, from the other people that are working. Still, your differentiators are going to be original ideas. If you compare 5 pieces of GPT writing, you're going to start seeing, for example, like how clinical they are. And the way that you can differentiate yourself, against your peers is by injecting your own humor, your own character, and not just submitting sanitized pieces of work, right? So there's still plenty of room for individuality in the sea of things helping you make things easier. That's all I have to say. Louis?
Go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, I think basically it's good on my impression so far from using it to do work and whatnot. It's good on 2 ends of the spectrum. It's good. It's pretty good as a learning tool, and it's really good as an amplification tool. If you know what you're doing, it's really good on that end. And it's also good if you're trying to learn. Somewhere in the middle, if you don't really know what you're doing, but you know what you're doing and you're not really using it to learn, I think it could be, you could still stumble with it because it's going to make mistakes and you're trying to figure out these mistakes and you don't know why it's making the mistake because you're not the domain expert. But if I extrapolate things out 10, 20 years with this thing, just as a mental exercise, I think the amount of code in the world is about to explode. Like it's literally about to explode. And all the companies that are like right now saying, oh, we're not going to use this thing, they're all going to go out of business. Like literally someone's just going to come in somehow, do this with GPT and just put them out of business. And it's because it's expensive to pay humans to do this work and do all this stuff. And someone's going to eat their lunch. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion. It's like saying, I hate computers. I don't want to use computers. I'm going to stick with pen and paper. Screw all these other companies that are using computers. All right, let's play this out in 10 years. Let's see where we are and where you are. And let's see what happens. And I think that's what's about to happen, frankly. So from every angle, right? So I think you can't avoid it. It's not like one of those things like we're not going to use. You could if you're like in a very niche business and you have really good, but if you're in a big business and there's enough of a pie to grab, I think you're going to be in trouble, basically. For Samsung, I think they're in trouble if they don't use this thing. But if you extrapolate things out, this means that the amount of code is going to explode, exponentially, right? So if we think about code when we were writing assembly, there was so many things we could do, and computers were only so useful because people could only do so many things with them. Now what's going to happen is, and then we went to higher order languages, and that opened up. I'm sure when we went to C++ and these other languages, people in the 70s and 80s were like, shit, we're probably going to need less programmers. No, actually, turns out we're going to need way more programmers, like way more. And I think the exact same thing's going to happen because you're going to have to make sense of so much shitty code, so much of it, that you're going to need a lot of these people to make sense of what's happening because you've got business people just pumping stuff out. You got all kinds of things happening. And it's a fascinating time because a lot of us are like the first generation of this. We're going to always remember a world where we didn't have a GPT and we had to write code raw by hand, savages. And I think, it's a fascinating thing. And I think we're going to be very valuable in this new world, frankly. This is my opinion, but I think we're going to be very valuable in this new world because there's going to be a lot of stuff that gets generated and it's regurgitated stuff. And it's going to be a lot of maximizing local maximas and all this other stuff and people trying to figure out why is the thing not doing what it's supposed to do. And we're going to look at it and say, oh, I see the problem. It's just this one line here and that's it. But I think and there's going to be a lot more people for that because there's going to be that much. It's hard to imagine. But imagine there is 100 times more code in the world right now than there was before. Do you think we need less or more devs just because GPT can pump more of it out? I think actually you need more devs. And so it's my opinion. I hold this and don't look at what's happening with the job market right now. I don't think anything that's happening with the job market right now is a function of AI. I think what's happening in the job market right now is a function of the COVID. It's a function of this crazy rise in tech companies over a very compressed period of time, and they thought this was going to continue. So I think what's happening with tech right now was baked in. What's about to happen with tech has not been baked in my opinion. And we're like the developers that understand assembly. I mean, I'm assuming all of us understand a little bit of assembly, but imagine we worked with assembly for years. And then now we're looking at some C+ code and we're like, oh yeah, we know what's going wrong. Like it's right there. And someone else can't see it because you don't know what that thing's translating to. You don't know what's happening. And so I think knowing these fundamentals, knowing the things that we know is actually going to make us quite valuable because there's going to be that much more code in the world. So and I genuinely believe that. I mean, I'm not just making it up. And I just think, look how fast I could put something together that can make money. Why wouldn't there be more of that? Why would there be less of that? It doesn't make sense. I think more people are going to do that. And companies like Samsung may get chewed up by 4, 5, 6, 7 companies that do things differently because they refuse to use this thing or whatever. Maybe that's a bad example. But overall, my instincts say that the opposite of what we think is about to happen is going to happen. And it's usually even like functional languages, functional programming languages, higher order. We used to say, oh, you need less code. So therefore, or whatever, right? Like it's just an easier thing to read. No, you still need to understand everything that's happening underneath. And sometimes you need to explode that out. And sometimes things are happening there that you need somebody who knows the thing to really figure out what's going wrong. So anyway, Thiago, want to jump in?
I love that. I think that's so true that we still need some COBOL programmers, right? But I think like overall, I see a lot more competition happening, especially if you are like a small better like you, Louis. I think like you'll be able to challenge big companies like no other point in the past. I think as like 1, 2 engineers now can make a big damage now. And I think if I had time, I could come up with so many ideas. And I feel that that's probably as fast as I could ever get as an engineer, even if I go 5, 10 years back when I was super fast. I think now I'm like at my top point because I have all those tools that are assisting me. And that's so powerful, right? And even though you're not going to able to get a product that is as shape up as the big companies, I think there'll be a lot of startups challenging those companies with like most GPT-4 generated coded and like a bunch of fixes on top of it, right? And the other thing is there is this idea of the second brain, right? This guy, Thiago Forte, has written this book called Building a Second Brain. And I feel that one of the things that he says a lot is what differentiates you is not exactly the access to content that you have, but like how you select the highlights and the things from everything you read and how you combine those things together in different ways. And I feel that like all those tools are amazing at helping you to select better content or even summarize, as Kira was saying, compress and decompress information, right? Vic was using like turning bullet points into paragraphs. I was turning paragraphs into bullet points. And I think that's a lot of mental power, right, to do those things. And I think just by having, let's say, all your notes and be able to have like a quick summary of what the content is there, like beauty indexes out of everything, you'll be able to turn content or to turn up ideas. I mean, super quick. So I think that can be super powerful even for innovation, and I don't think like GPT-4 is going to be able to come up with like ideas that are new out of existing things, right? New abstract. I think they're just replicating existing patterns and like previous answers in really creative ways. But I think what is going to move the needle and as a professional is like contextualizing a lot of information. Even if you get like 100K of like things on a message, you're not going to be able to go all the context you have and coming up or be able to ask a prompt that is going to put like GPT-4 on the right direction. And I think that's what's going to differentiate. And I also see that we're going to need more programmers and not less because we're going to be able to automate more things. But I mean, I don't know at what point in time like this tools are going to make easier for folks that are non-techie or non-engineers to actually not only code some of basic, but to actually be able to learn and debug and come up with insights if they never had the experience doing things by hand, right? I don't know where's the turning point. Is someone starting today, like someone joining like a CS degree today, starting new college? I don't know if they're gonna have to go to the same like learning, the same kind of challenge they had because now they have new tools. And I don't know at what point the law of leaky abstraction, right, is gonna come to play.
Thanks for sharing, Tiago. Yeah, I agree. I think GPT-4 is powerful enough that it's passed the bar exam, right? It beat 90% of the lawyers trying to clear the bar exam. So it's great at processing data, regurgitating it in standard exam, right? So GPT-4 passed, the US medical licensing exam. So you don't need 5 years of undergrad plus 3 years of grad school plus 2 years of residency and then passing the US medical licensing exam to be a doctor. You can just ask GPT-4 and it can clear the exam for you. Same with the SATs that you include in your college applications to show proficiency in reading, writing, math. GPT-4, I think just last year, the average score was 10 out of 1600 and the average score for all the SATs was 1060. So it's already doing better at comprehension, at passing exams. And this has become a pain point for a lot of teachers, a lot of facilitators on how do they structure their exams? How are they supposed to test knowledge in their students when OpenAI, ChatGPT, what have you, is commonly available? They can put in their questions in whatever field they are and come up with the answer. All the answers look unique, but it's all some AI model coming up with this answer. So it's definitely made jobs of teachers, instructors a lot more complicated where they have to do more in-class examinations or more projects or more long-form papers to make sure that there is no GPT helping hand there, or even worse, writing the whole exam or whole take-home exam for them. Maybe we can do a quick round around what AI tools you folks use personally, or one area that you think AI is totally going to be disruptive or be helpful in. A couple of tools that I saw recently that I really liked was if you have a picture, you can use like the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite or whatever to say, remove the smudge or remove the cigarette butt or remove the guy photobombing my picture. And it does an amazing job of clearing the background. You can replace it with mountains or water or forest, and it transforms it beautifully without... I know there are a few startups trying to help you read legal documents. You give it your legal document. Nobody reads those 30-page legal documents. You all say, I accept and move on. So there's a few tools that help you truly understand what you're signing before you sign it. There are some that will help summarize reviews. Let's say you're Amazon reseller, you have 3,000 reviews. You can give it to this AI tool and it'll summarize the sentiment for you saying, most of your customers hate this feature, but they love these two features. You should double down on this. So sentiment analysis, there's so many possibilities. So maybe are there any areas that you folks find fascinating or personally use for summarizing podcasts or videos or using it for images or memes or what have you? Anything fun, helpful, productive?
Yeah, one idea that I have, and I have not been able to implement this, I wish I could. I have, 4,000 videos on my watch later YouTube playlist. But I wish I could just offload that and maybe send the transcript of each one of the videos and ask to come up with the top 3 highlights or insightful things out of that and put on a Evernote or some software that I could see all that information text with really executive summaries, right? And then I could consume a lot more content and be able to see, okay, maybe here it would be something worth watching, or a podcast that a 3-hour interview that would, it seems to have some interesting things that I still don't know, because a lot of times you're watching things that you already know and that's boring, and you end up spending your time consuming content that is not as valuable. So I think doing that could be almost a filter to select what kind of content is worthwhile consuming in its entirety. That's just one idea, but I think there are many others that I could come up with, auto tagging on things, trying to, if you have a lot of notes, trying to come up with tags and combine them to be able to filter information faster in the future. I think that seems to be a really good use and something that would would be hard to do with any other tool in the past because they're not able to hold the context out of those things.
Vic, do you have any that you use or like or recommend?
I think GPT-4 is probably the one that I use the most. I've heard of people generating images with Midjourney and Dolly and things like that. I don't find those all that useful because I really like what is really the most time saving for me is just someone to do some research for me and or be a rubber duck. I find like those to be the most useful. One thing that I have heard a couple of my friends talk about using and I haven't yet is they'll say something like, I need to eat a 50-gram protein breakfast. Like come up with a breakfast plan for me, and it will do that. It will be like 2 scrambled eggs, cottage cheese, and it will tabulate the amount of protein. And I've also had one of my friends who's had it like come up with a running plan for him to get faster. So I feel like something that is like this sort of this personal coach and personal nutritionist for people who are too shy to go talk to a person. Now, I know that there are AI therapists and I don't know how I feel about that. And that is not something that I have thoughts on. But in terms of like nutritionist and like exercise plan builder, I think that is like great. I've also seen it used for, I want to learn web development, come up with a 6-week plan for me of what order I should learn what. I found it to be really useful. So, and the thing is, it's not coming up with like brand new material, right? It's linking you to existing material saying, go read XYZ. And I find that it's really good for it. And we talked today about using it as a travel planner. That's an industry that has done so much to write blog posts that are basically being used as training material to put that industry out of business, right? Short of that, yeah, I don't really use like headshots or any of that stuff, but I will take anyone's suggestions. If people reply to this episode with all the different ways that they're using various AI tools, I'd love to learn more.
Louis, do you want to share yours?
Well, I mean, I'm a very heavy user of GPT-4. I've been using DALL-E 3 a little bit I just recently actually started using that for my articles. But I mean, I almost feel like a lot of that, especially when it comes to using it to create content or whatever, it's very repetitive, right? Like it's like the same, it looks like right away it's made, even the image stuff, right away it's made by AI. And so it's just an interesting thing. Like I just feel like it heavily leans towards whatever style it's been heavily trained on. And so it's no good for content and whatnot. But it is, I mean, for code, you don't mind. And so I use it, like I said, very heavily for code. And one thing I want to say, though, about where I think this is heading, especially in terms of the tooling and all of that, my brother's very big into this space. He's actually pretty much all in AI right now. He's training models in his basement. He's literally got a whole bunch of NVIDIA GPUs, which they're very hard to get. He's got a rack of 16 of, I don't know how many he's got, 16 of them or something. And he's just training models and it takes a few hours. And the open source stuff has gotten incredible, right? Like we're talking Meta has dropped some models that are just on the cusp of beating GPT-4. And they're just going to get better and better. And what's really fascinating, and where my brother thinks this is all heading, is that, number one, once you train these models, right, like the hard part is training them. You need the GPUs for training them. So to run them, it's a whole other thing. And you don't need the same kind of compute to run them. You just need that to get them fully trained up. And so it's a very interesting thing because I think what's going to end up happening ultimately is that you're going to have these very purpose-built models. Some of them might even be able to run them on your phone. And so they'll be totally local, right? They were trained on this data set and then they interact with you on your phone. And I think that's where a lot of this stuff is headed. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Like I would love to I had this idea for an app to tell stories to my kids or so my kids could use it. But I would never use GPT-4 for that. I wouldn't want that talking to my kids. But if I had a model that was only trained on children's books and it was stopped from pulling in anything else from the web, so that wouldn't be too bad. I wouldn't feel bad about them interacting with this thing that's read thousands of children's books. It's probably going to tell them good stories and they'll have fun with it. And it's an interesting thing because I think there's going to be a whole lot of that now. And especially because, again, my brother's training them in his basement. I mean, he's got a lot of experience as a software engineer, but he's not a trained AI researcher or anything. He's learned it all on his own. And people are citing some of his work on papers that are being released by these. Because a lot of these people that work on this stuff are not the same people that can run it on their garage. It's the fact that he could take their thing, run it and do these crazy things with it and augment it and make it more efficient and all kinds of stuff has been really interesting. But I think that's where it's headed. And with that in mind, I think a lot of us will probably be using various different models. Some will be just for code And in some ways, I'm sad because it's quite cool what GPT-4 is doing. But I do think the fact that we got 3.5, we got 4, I do think, not that they're hitting up some upper limits, but they really are bouncing against the technology. It's taking a while for 5 to come out. And I know they're talking about, and I mean, I saw some numbers where they said how many billions of dollars is going to cost to train 5 or whatever. But the point is that I think there's going to be a whole bunch of tools that use these smaller models that are just for the purpose. And in a lot of ways, they won't be leaking your data. They'll be very secure. And so I'll be looking out for tools like that, basically. Hopefully, maybe try to build some too, somehow. But that's it. That's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Louis. So yeah, just in closing, I'd like to express my gratitude to all of our listeners for listening to our podcast today. We've had an enlightening discussion about GPT-4. We went into Copilot, AI tools, impact to the field of engineering. So these technologies are truly revolutionizing the world, making it easier to develop, to test, to deploy software. And it's really lowered the barrier of entry. So anyone can now start building extensions, coding, at least learning how to do tasks that they didn't know how to do previously. As we stride into the future, let's keep an open mind about the possibilities that AI presents. Until then, stay curious, keep learning, and remember, future is now. Thank you all once again for joining us today. See you next week.